Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Fertility Confidence podcast. I hope you're having a beautiful summer so far. I actually cannot believe that it is almost August. I don't know where the summer has gone. Obviously, if you are in a nice climate where it's good weather all year round, you're like, who cares? For me, here in Southern Ontario, are like 8 weeks of good weather. It's fleeting. So it is flying by. We are enjoying ourselves here as a family. We've had lots of time at the water, which has been great, doing lots of fun stuff with the kids. So I hope that you are enjoying your summer as well. I was actually chatting with someone at our kids swimming lessons this week and explaining to her what I do. And she was asking me, do people usually take a break from fertility treatments and things like that in the summer? And I was like, oh, some do for sure. But it's also a great time, I think, to kind of look into and get support, especially from practitioners, because it can be a little bit slower. We personally find our private practice, our clinic here in Ontario, a little bit slower in the summer months. So it's always, I think, a good time to just start like taking care of yourself. Often we have like more energy in the summer, or a little bit more motivated. So now is the time, honestly. So before we get into 3 fertility red flags, the Instagrammers have spoken this week. I said, what do you want to hear about? What do you want to know? This is the topic that they picked. Don't worry. If you picked lining, we will circle back to it. I don't think next week, but maybe the week after. We'll talk about lining, but today I'm going to share 3 fertility red flags that I want you to think about and consider. But before we do that, I just want to take a quick second and thank our amazing podcast sponsor, Needed. They are such a wonderful company to work with, and they make navigating the supplement world that much easier. Even as a practitioner, it can be uber frustrating sometimes. Just today, I posted in our Fertility Confidence Method community about a supplement recall in Canada here. And I mentioned to our clients, like, this is why we recommend professional brands and brands that use third-party testing. It's really important that we're using something that's not only effective, but actually also safe too. So Needed does such a good job formulating their top quality nutrient products. They use clinical research. They use amazing collaboration with women's health experts, and they're products created for women by women. They're also B Corp and climate neutral certified, which I personally love. So you can find more about Needed and some of my favorite products over at thisisneeded.com. And if you use the code Dr. Kelsey, Dr. Kelsey, you'll get 20% off your first order, which is so generous of them. So thank you, Needed. So let's talk about 3 fertility red flags, okay? One thing, 2 of these, maybe you might go, one of them's like, duh, obvious, Kelsey. But I do think that it's really important to consider, because there's been a lot of times where women have come in to work with us and they're like, I, asked my doctor for support. They told me to keep trying. But when we've dug deeper into their health history, I'm like, you've got a lot of red flags here. Like, why aren't you being supported earlier rather than later? So number 1 fertility red flag is irregular cycles. Okay. And this is kind of like the no-brainer one, but I thought it was important to mention because I do think that it can be brushed off as like, oh, that's just your normal. Don't worry, keep trying, come back in a year. It's still lumped in that, like, well, for 12 months, try. And there's a few frustrating things with that. One, if you have long irregular cycles, your amount of times to try in that 12 months, is significantly lower than someone that's having a consistent 28-day cycle, right? Instead of having 12 periods in a year or 11, you might only have 5. And so it's a very different timeline approach that shouldn't be lumped into that keep trying. Why it's a red flag is that the reason behind the irregular cycles might not just be an annoyance of long delayed ovulation and lack of amount of times to try in 12 months. It might actually give us insight into other fertility issues. So a few things that we want to look at, and we have talked about irregular cycles on the podcast before. If you want to scroll back, I don't actually know the episode number right now, but I will, you know what, I'm going to actually write this down, because the amount of times my FCM clients will know this, where I'm like, I'll circle back to this. I'll actually put the episode number in the show notes for you. So if you read through the description and you want to go back and listen to that episode, that will be there for you. But a few things that we want to look into as to why you're having irregular cycles. We want to know the root cause. Here's a big fact, like a big piece that's often being misunderstood in terms of this concept of continue trying for 12 months and then we'll dig deeper, is like the root cause is the same at 3 months as it is at 18, typically, right? Some other like new things might crop up, or you might dig a little bit deeper and find more. The layers of the onion might be peeled back. But the reality is that if there's something negatively impacting your chances every single month, it's likely going to be the same. And so why are we waiting? If you have long irregular cycles, we are further delaying your time to success by making you wait to figure out why you're having long irregular cycles. Like, it just makes no sense. And yet the reason I wanted to include it in this conversation is not necessarily because you might not be thinking that it's a problem, but I want you to know that if you are having long irregular cycles, don't let your primary care physician just brush off like, well, you haven't been trying that long, so keep going. Like, no, this is a big red flag. Why is this happening? Is it because you have insulin resistance? Is it because you have PCOS or elevated androgens, all those kind of being lumped together? Are we dealing with premature ovarian insufficiency? Do you have low reserve or low pituitary hormones and you're just not ovulating consistently? Are we potentially dealing with a thyroid issue, either just hypothyroidism, subclinical hypothyroidism, autoimmune hypothyroidism? Like, there are lots of potential root cause buckets that we want to dig into if you are experiencing these long irregular cycles, that then in turn, yes, treatment, hopefully improvement in terms of frequency of ovulation, but also there's so many other negative impacts to the fertility space with those pieces, i.e. increased miscarriage risk or poor implantation rates, that we need to be treating that now, right? So that's number one. Okay. Irregular cycles, long irregular cycles. These are things that we want to dig a little bit deeper into. And it's something that we see quite commonly inside Fertility Confidence Method when women come in that like 8 to 12 month range and they're like, I need support. I'm done doing this on my own. No one's taking me seriously. And we're like, okay, we got you. Don't worry. We're going to dig deeper and figure out why is this actually happening? And then what else does that mean? Sometimes opening that door leads us down a journey where we start to uncover more potential blocks that are important. So the sooner we do that, the better. Number two is an interesting one, actually, maybe slightly controversial, but it's something that I want you to think about. If you are early on in your journey and you have been sexually active for however many years and perhaps haven't been as careful with avoiding pregnancy, or if you're like, yeah, we weren't really trying, but we stopped preventing and we haven't gotten pregnant. So I hear that quite a bit of like, well, we've been actively trying for a year, but we weren't preventing pregnancy for the year before. So that is a big red flag, right? Because the chances of you like epically timing that appropriately without protection is, slim to none, essentially. So if you have had a certain amount of time where you're like, oh yeah, I was sexually active and I was not really taking the right precautions and there were no accidental pregnancies in that time frame, we want to say, okay, interesting. Let's dig deeper into why that might be going on. And it's the same look as to why, you're not getting pregnant in the first place, but it would be a reason for me to say, like, sooner rather than later, we want to be digging deeper. So if you're earlier in your journey, we actually want to use that as a timeline to be like, oh, you know what? No, like, let's lump this in together. And we do hear this quite a bit from our clients in FCM where they'll say things like, we've been actively trying for a few months, but like, to be honest, we haven't been using protection for years. And it's like, okay, intriguing. Like, are you just that good at like knowing ovulation and being really uber careful? Like, we don't know, right? So I think it's important to kind of consider that if you are early in your journey and you're like, we're going to start trying, or we've only been trying for a couple months, but like in reality, have we been uber careful? Not necessarily, and nothing's happened. So let's be a little bit more proactive in those situations. Okay. And then the third red flag is heavy or painful periods prior to oral birth control or hormonal birth control. And this is a really great question to ask yourself. It's a question your practitioner should be asking you. And that is, what were your periods like before you went on hormonal birth control? A lot of women go on hormonal birth control. A lot of women go on hormonal birth control when they're like 14 years old, 15 years old. So sometimes when I ask my clients this question, they're like, Kelsey, I have no idea. I don't remember. Whereas others are like, oh, I went on the pill because my periods were friggin' atrocious, right? That insight matters regardless of what your periods are like coming off, especially if you're newly coming off of the birth control. If you had very heavy, painful periods for however long prior to going on the pill, for some women who go on the pill or hormonal birth control very, very early, very young in life, let's say haven't really had their regular menstruation for more than a year, heavy bleeding is within the realm of normal when we're first starting menarche. That menarche is that first bleed. And then when we're first getting that regular cycle, there is irregularity that would be within normal. Some discomfort and pain would be within normal. Heaviness would be within normal. But if you were a few years before going on hormonal birth control and or your periods were just so incredibly atrocious that you were missing school, that you were put on this medication literally to control this environment, this is information that is like, okay, red flag, right? What was going on in your body at age 15 is likely still going on, but the birth control controlled the symptoms. So you didn't have the heaviness, you didn't have the pain because you weren't having that hormonal rhythm that we do without the suppression from the birth control, right? So we now want to keep that in as like a history marker to say, okay, interesting. Are we dealing with endometriosis? Did you have very irregular periods before going on the pill? Interesting. Do you have PCOS? Like, these are things that we want to then dig deeper into early on in your journey because they might crop back up, right? Some women come off the pill and like, oh, my periods are totally different. They're really easy, really simple, normal bleeding, totally regular, awesome. Okay. Because there is some like degree of variation when we are young and menstruating before our hormones really find that rhythm. But we don't want to ignore the potential that we've been masking hormonal issues like masking endometriosis, masking PCOS, masking like deficiencies in estrogen and progesterone, or too much estrogen and poor detoxification. It's really common to come off hormonal birth control and have hormonal deficiencies because the body now needs to relearn how to do those things. For some women, it's 2-3 months and their body understands and they're back, moving and grooving the way they should. For other women, it can take a year. It can take 2 years even. So definitely, I'm going to quote another episode to listen to, but definitely listen to our birth control episode. I'll put those, there's 2, it's a part 1 and part 2, and I'll pop that into the show notes for you as well with Lisa Hendricks and Jack, because she does talk a lot about transitioning off of birth control. So if that is new for you in your journey, if you're close in that timeline, that would be a really great one to listen to. But we always want to consider, what were your periods like before? Because that might actually give you a window of insight into what could we be potentially dealing with. And we actually just had this conversation. So inside Fertility Confidence Method, which is our way that we help couples achieve pregnancy, I do a daily office hour. So all of our clients can log in Monday to Friday and have a chance to have a conversation with me directly, which is really fun. And just today, actually, we were talking about this with one of our clients, and she was saying, I suspect I have endometriosis. And the first thing I said was, okay, what were your periods like when you were young, like before you went on birth control? Oh, they were very, very, very painful, very, very heavy. Immediately, I was like, worth investigating. Immediately. Her periods are still heavy. Still painful. So still immediately worth investigating. And I say that also wanting to acknowledge that if you are a woman with suspected endometriosis or known endometriosis, I want to just give the asterisk that like it's easy for me to sit here and say like, oh, investigate that. But I know, especially here in Ontario, it's not that simple. The wait times are long. Practitioners often aren't wanting to do the laparoscopic surgery to properly investigate. So we could talk about this for hours, quite literally, on how poorly managed endometriosis is in mainstream medicine. And a part of that, I don't think, is totally medicine's fault. We need more specialists. We just do. But especially in the fertility space, this is something that whenever someone comes in to work with us and they're like, oh, I have really heavy periods, I'm like, oh, God damn it. Because you can't leave endo off the table. And we know from the literature that if a woman has painful periods and they're suffering from infertility, there's something like a 75% chance that they have endometriosis. Like that's quite high. Now we have this whole other thing with like, well, how is the endo impacting you? We don't fully comprehend or understand how endo impacts you from an immunological perspective, an inflammatory perspective, a hormonal perspective, a physical perspective, egg quality perspective. Is the surgery safe? Like there's just all of these factors, but that we also can't ignore. And so this is my long-winded asterisk of just saying like, if you're trying to get an endo diagnosis and it's really challenging, I see you, I hear you. It is really challenging and it friggin' sucks. Like there's really just no good way to put that, honestly. So, but the more like the end goal of kind of this conversation is if that's you, if you're like, oh, listening and you're saying to yourself, yeah, I have really painful periods and I did before I went on birth control. I have my whole life. I have to take medication. Like I used to miss school. I can manage it better now as an adult woman, but like it's still pretty painful and you're not getting pregnant. Definitely worth having that conversation and at least getting the ball rolling in terms of having a proper referral. Your GP is not going to be the place to get help here. You're going to need to seek out an OBGYN who specializes in endometriosis, a fertility clinic, somebody that is going to take that idea and what you're saying seriously and be willing to do what needs to be done for a diagnosis. So did not mean to talk so much about endo, but I think it's important. So I really want you to honestly, we could probably keep going in terms of like, what are the things that come up in conversation with clients that immediately set off alarm bells with me? But I think these are 3 really easy things for you to consider at home in terms of when do I need to get support, okay? And if you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time, you'll know that I'm a huge supporter of getting support as early as possible. Not just because I believe that this is going to be a challenging journey for everyone, because I truly believe that everyone can get pregnant, but some people do need more support. And I do believe that getting proper support and not trying to just piecemeal and do this on your own is going to do 2 things for you. One, it's going to greatly impact your mental health. Getting help before you are drowning in what the fuck am I supposed to do here is going to drastically improve your mental health. We know from the research something like over 60% of women deal with depression and anxiety when they're going through the fertility and TTC journey. More than half. And I bet you that number is actually higher. Given my small sample size in FCM compared to the world, I feel like that number is likely higher. But when you get support, both support with your actual fertility care plan, but also mental health support, you at least don't feel like you're drowning, right? You at least have that safe place to go to get your questions answered. You have that place to go to help from a mental health perspective. I think it's so important. But the other piece of that is that you're also really making strides in terms of supporting your body quicker by having that professional dig deep and find the root cause versus you being like, oh, I read about that on Facebook, it must be good, I'm going to try it, right? There's a very stark difference between those two things. So huge supporter of support early on. You're never too early. Okay. We actually got this question a lot on clarity calls this week, and of people being like, I've only been trying for a couple months. Like, kind of feel like it's a bit early. No, the sooner the better. And this is where these red flags come into play. If you are someone with irregular cycles, if you are someone that actually hasn't been preventing pregnancy, but hasn't gotten pregnant, that's something we need to consider as like a longevity perspective. And then if you have heavy, painful periods, either now, but like red flag kind of consideration being, what was your period like before you went on hormonal birth control, if that was a part of your story? Because if you're just transitioning off of birth control and we haven't really found regulation yet, we want to consider that as like, that likely will come back. And what does that mean? And dig deeper, dig till we find that root cause, or at least that first layer of the onion. Work on that, peel back until you're pregnant. That's obviously the goal. And not just pregnant, but until you've given birth and you feel like your family is complete, right? These are ongoing strategies here. So hopefully that is helpful for you. I will put the episodes that I referenced in the show notes for you. So make sure that you go check those out if those are of interest. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. Welcome to my world. I'm active over on Instagram. Come and find me at Fertility Confidence Method. We also have a YouTube channel if you want to watch the episodes with video. Hello, check me out on YouTube, Dr. Kelsey Duncan, ND. And if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, it would mean the world to me if you would just quickly hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any episodes that are coming out over the rest of the year. We have some really fun interviews planned, but also the more that we have from a subscribed perspective on the Apple platform, Spotify, whatever you're listening on, the more those platforms will actually show the Fertility Confidence podcast to women who are searching for similar things, so that we can get more of this information into the hands of couples that are also looking for support right now. So thank you so much. Have a beautiful week. I'll see you guys in the next one.